Following the recent advice from the Senate parliamentarian on the minimum wage, this parliamentarian said, "No, you can't put this $15 minimum wage into a COVID relief bill." Bernie Sanders says, "Too bad. I'm gonna do it anyway." In fact, he says that he is going to force the Senate to vote this week on an amendment to increase the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. So now, as I said before, the parliamentarian, Elizabeth McDonough, ruled last week that the provision setting the minimum wage at $15 an hour would not be eligible under the rules, these special budget rules. Now, the thing about rules is that you can change the rules. You can actually literally hold a vote to change the rules, or you can also just ignore the Senate parliamentarian, since she literally has no power. She's an advisor. Or you could do what Republicans did and just fire your Senate parliamentarian and then hire somebody who actually agrees with you. All this stuff that you could do. All right. So now her recommendation is basically worth nothing. And so now Bernie Sanders is saying, well, we're not going to let her get in the way of passing a $15 minimum wage. So that actually means that there's still a chance of this actually happening. Now, Sanders told reporters, "My personal view is the idea that we have a Senate staffer, a high-ranking staffer, deciding whether 30 million Americans get a pay raise or not is nonsensical." Absolutely. We have got to make that decision, not a staffer who's unelected. So my own view is that we should ignore the rulings, the decision of the parliamentarian. Sanders added, "Given the enormous crises facing this country and the desperation of working families, we've got to, as soon as possible, also end the filibuster. We cannot have a minority of members define what the American people want." 100%. I mean, the fact that we haven't gotten rid of the filibuster, that we don't have the votes to do so, despite having a majority, it's ridiculous. Now, as far as the wage is concerned, here's what he said. "To the best of my knowledge, there will be a vote on a minimum wage, and we'll see what happens." Bernie says, "I intend to offer the bill that will raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and we'll see how the votes go. If we fail in this legislation, I will be back. We are going to keep going." Oh, I love it. We are going to raise that minimum wage very shortly to $15 an hour. Let's do it. Let's do it, Bernie. Now, of course, there are Democrats that are standing in the way. One of them is Joe Manchin. The other one is Kyrsten Sinema. So now Joe Manchin has his own plan, separate from the rest of the Democratic Party. Now, most of the Democratic Party has campaigned, they've run on this. Yes, we're going to do a living wage. We're going to raise it to $15 an hour. This is what they're going to do. Kamala Harris ran on this. Biden ran on this. Numerous Democrats during the election ran on this. And so to go against that, to not do it, would be a massive failure when you supposedly have control of the government. And a lot of it has to do, of course, with these two Democrats that really, at least in the case of Joe Manchin, really just wants to get his ass kissed. He loves being the so-called swing vote. Okay. So now in trying to be a self-important ass, Manchin got his own plan to raise the wage to a whopping $11 an hour and index into inflation. So, that is $1 more than the Mitt Romney proposal to raise the minimum wage. Yeah, Mitt Romney's getting into this with a group of so-called moderate Republicans to raise it to $10 an hour. So now let me be clear here, okay? Manchin, Romney, Bernie, $15 is not what we wanted. That's actually not the wage that we need or should be going for. But $15 is the compromise. It is what we're willing to settle on at the very least. It should be much higher. But you know what? For now, we'll take $15 an hour as a compromise. All right. And so I want to be very, very clear on that. All right. Now for Manchin, he's, it's not surprising to see Manchin fighting harder against raising wages than he ever did against Donald Trump. And it's not because, he's a moderate or a centrist. Again, a moderate centrist approach would be $15 an hour. And why? It's because the numbers back me up. There is no state in this country where you can live and rent a home on $7.25 an hour. All right. You just can't. Even in West Virginia, one of the cheapest states to live in, as well as one of the poorest in the country, a person still requires $14 an hour to live without government assistance. All right. So let me just, the numbers are very clear. We need a wage, a raise in the wage, and we've needed it for a long time, and we need it desperately. All right. So what we need is that right now to go to that compromise position and then continue to fight for higher wages after that. It is a fight that never ends. All right. So now, Elizabeth Warren, she also favors a vote to overrule the parliamentarian. She agrees, but also says, you know what we should also do? Get rid of the filibuster. So now, look, Elizabeth Warren has pretty poor political instincts and has made some very questionable decisions, especially with politics. But in this, she's right. And so given that Elizabeth Warren is saying this and how, career-minded she is, I think it's a pretty safe bet that a lot of people, I think this is a popular position that even she's willing to stake her name on, which, again, you don't get that from Elizabeth Warren on a lot of things. And so I think there's some fire behind this call to end the filibuster. So, and I think that's great. Here's what she said. Understand the only reason that we're in this mess is because of the filibuster. If we could get rid of the filibuster, then we wouldn't have to keep trying to force the camel through the eye of the needle. And that's actually a pretty great Bible reference as well. Instead, we would do what the majority of Americans want us to do in this particular case. That's raise the minimum wage. Manchin, as I said, along with Sinema, they've also vowed to fight against any effort to eliminate the filibuster. In fact, asked if he might change his mind at some point, he turned around and yelled at reporters, quote, "Never. Jesus Christ, what don't you understand about never?" So, all right. Let me just point out, Joe Manchin doesn't give a damn about progress. Okay? Joe Manchin is basically a Republican. The filibuster, as it's been used and abused by Mitch McConnell, is basically there to stop any sort of progress. Mitch McConnell has literally abused it for decades to prevent Democrats from basically doing anything. Now, there are some Democrats that are actually happy about that, like Joe Manchin, because they're secretly Republicans and they don't want any sort of progress. I mean, it's fairly clear, right? I mean, why else would you keep a thing that guarantees that your side loses every single policy fight ever to Republicans, while Republicans always tend to get their way? Well, maybe it's because you're on their side. Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema they're with the Republicans. They're with the Republicans. Full stop. And so now, that said, Bernie's plan to force this particular vote, that's a good strategy, because the only Democrats that are really openly against this are Sinema and Joe Manchin. Forcing the vote would put those two people on the spot, not just for stopping the wage, which many Democrats ran on, but they're actually really smart putting this into a COVID-19 bill. That's that relief bill. If you sink that, I mean, you're gonna hear from everybody, because this is bipartisan, popular across the board, and is very, very necessary. And if they hear that the Democrats are the one that sunk it, bloodbath in 2022 and in 2024. And if the Democrats get sunk because of Joe Manchin, people aren't going to care which Democrat it is. They're going to blame all Democrats. And that's why this is important, right? That's why this could actually work. This is literally their chance to get this done, which is why it was very important for Bernie Sanders not only to fight, but also to keep this in, to not abandon the $15 minimum wage. and take it out of the COVID-19 relief bill. He's saying we're going to leave it back in and we're going to have a vote on this. All right, we're going to have it. We're going to have a vote and we're going to see where the votes lie. And if you vote against it, well, I mean, it's not my fault what consequences you're going to face if you vote against this. And I'm saying that the Democrats have so much to lose if they allow Manchin to sink this entire thing. Harris, Biden, other Democrats ran on this. If they don't do this, who's going to vote Democrat ever again? They already waffled on the $2,000 checks. Yeah, I know. They found a way out of that. Biden did because, technically $1,400 plus $600, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay, whatever. That's some tricky, underhanded shit right there. But on this, there's no clear path out of this. You can't blame the Republicans because you're doing budget reconciliation. So you only need a simple majority. And by the way, Republicans are pushing their own minimum wage increase. And so, Republicans can say, well, I mean, we were looking to raise the minimum wage. What were the Democrats doing? They weren't doing anything. They let it go to $7.25 an hour. And, I mean, you vote for us. And then you got Josh Hawley out there, who was also pushing this weird, confusing mess of a tax credit thing. But he can also go out there and say, well, look, I was trying to raise wages for you, sort of. I mean, so you can't blame the Republicans in this case. You also have the fact that the Democrats are in the majority. And if they can't get something like this done when they're in the majority, what makes you think that the American people are going to want to put Democrats in the majority? The Democrats, they suck at politics. But do they suck that much that they're going to risk everything for Joe Manchin? I don't know. I've seen some bad decisions before from the Democrats. So maybe, maybe. But this would probably rank up there for political blunders. They just have no excuse not to pass this and will have no one to blame but themselves when they get blown out in 2022, 2024. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and share with your friends. You can subscribe and help out the channel by becoming a patron. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf, or you can become a channel member as well by hitting the join button below.